I never meant to go back to the storage unit. There was no reason to. My son had been gone for 16 months, and the unit out on Route 9 near Belleville, New Jersey was just one more thing I hadn't dealt with. One more thing I kept telling myself I'd handle when I was ready. The thing about grief is that ready never quite arrives. You just wake up one morning and the weight has shifted enough that you can move under it. The reason I finally went wasn't closure or some decision I made sitting in a therapist's office. It was a certified letter from Secure Lock Storage informing me that Unit 114, registered in my son Elliot's name, was 3 months past due on payment, and that if I did not respond within 14 business days, the contents would be auctioned. I read that letter twice at my kitchen table in Montclair. Elliot had never mentioned the unit to me. As far as I knew, he kept everything that mattered in the house he owned in Parsippany, the house he shared with his wife Renee, I called the storage facility and confirmed it. The unit had been opened in Elliot's name 14 months before he died. It had been paid on time, every month, right up until 4 months after his funeral, and then the payments stopped. I put the letter in my jacket pocket and I drove to Belleville. Let me tell you about my son first, because I think that's the only way any of what follows makes sense. Elliot was 37 when he died. He was a structural engineer, the kind of man who understood how things were held together, buildings, systems, other people. He had a way of listening to you that made you feel like whatever you were saying was the most important thing he'd heard all day. He coached his nephew's Little League team on weekends, even though he and Renee didn't have children of their own. He remembered every birthday in the family, called my older sister on her anniversary every year because she was a widow, and he said the day deserved a phone call. He had his mother's patience and my inability to let an injustice sit without poking at it. His mother passed from a stroke 4 years before he did. When she died, Elliot drove up from Parsippany at 2 in the morning and sat with me in the kitchen until sunrise and didn't say much. He just stayed. Elliot died on a Friday evening in February 18 months ago now. He had been driving back from a job site in Allentown, Pennsylvania on Interstate 78. The state police report listed it as a single vehicle accident. He crossed the center line, struck a guardrail on the left shoulder, and the vehicle went down an embankment. They said the roads were icy in that corridor. They said it was consistent with a loss of control on a wet surface. Case closed in less than 3 days. I didn't question it then. I was 61 years old, and my son was gone, and I had no framework for anything except getting through each day without my wife, and now without him. I was the last one standing in a family that had been 4 people and was now just me. Renee handled everything efficiently. She arranged a funeral, coordinated with the insurance companies, managed the paperwork with a composure that I told myself was just her way. Some people process grief by staying busy. I told myself she was one of those people. Now I was driving to a storage unit that no one had ever told me existed. The woman at the front desk of Secure Lock was named Patty, and she had the particular manner of someone who has seen every kind of human situation walk through her door and stopped being surprised by any of it. I showed her the certified letter and my ID and explained that I was the deceased account holder's father. She nodded like this happened twice a week, because it probably did, and walked me back to Unit 114 herself. The unit was a 10 by 10, climate controlled. When Patty unlocked the roll-up door, the first thing I smelled was motor oil and cardboard. The first thing I saw was a shelving unit along the back wall, and on those shelves, in labeled plastic bins and carefully stacked boxes, were records, financial records, employment records, property records, and 3 external hard drives in a row on the top shelf, each one labeled in my son's handwriting with a date range. Elliot had been building a file. I stood in the doorway of that storage unit for a long time. Patty said she'd give me some privacy and walk back to the front office. I stepped inside and I pulled the first box off the shelf and I sat down on the concrete floor in my good jacket and I started reading. It took me 4 visits over 2 weeks to go through everything in that unit. I want to tell you what I found, but I need to tell you the shape of it first, because it didn't land all at once. It landed in layers, the way bad news does when it's been carefully concealed over a long period of time. The first layer was financial. Elliot had printed and organized bank statements, credit card statements, and brokerage account records going back 3 years. He had highlighted certain transactions in yellow, large transfers out of their joint account into an account I didn't recognize, recurring charges to a hotel in Hoboken, a car payment on a vehicle that wasn't registered to either of them, a lease on an apartment in Jersey City, signed 7 months before he died, with a name I didn't know on the cosigner line. The name on the cosigner line was Gavin Sutherland. I wrote that name down on the legal pad I'd brought with me, and I sat with it for a moment, and then I opened the second box. The second layer was photographs, printed photographs, the kind you make at a drugstore. Renee at a restaurant I recognized as being in Hoboken, sitting across from a man I had never seen before. Renee and the same man walking along the Hudson waterfront. Renee in a parking lot, kissing him. The photographs were dated in the corner. The earliest one was from 26 months before Elliot died. I put those photographs back in the box and I walked outside and I stood in the secure locked parking lot in the February cold for about 10 minutes. Not because I was surprised, exactly. Something in me had shifted the moment I'd seen the contents of that unit, had understood what kind of room I was standing in. But understanding something in your head and feeling it settle into your chest are two different things, and I needed those 10 minutes. The third layer took me longer to process. The third layer was what Elliot had been investigating in the months before he died. He had been methodical about it. There were printouts from property records databases, social media archives, screenshots of conversations I won't describe in detail here. What I can tell you is that Gavin Sutherland was not just a man Renee was seeing behind Elliot's back. He was a man with a prior history that Elliot had been quietly uncovering. A prior civil case involving a financial dispute with a former partner, a pattern documented across multiple sources of attaching himself to people and situations where assets were in flux. At the back of the second hard drive, in a folder labeled simply with a question mark, Elliot had compiled the timeline. The timeline began 26 months before his death and ended 2 weeks before he died. The last entry was a note to himself, 4 words, need to talk to someone. He had been building towards something. He hadn't finished building it. I took the 3 hard drives home with me and I called my attorney. My attorney is a man named Clifford who has handled my business contracts and estate matters for 18 years. Clifford is the kind of lawyer who speaks slowly and never uses 2 words when one will do, and who has a habit of pausing before he says anything important, as if he is making sure he means exactly what he's about to say. I told him everything. I told him about the storage unit, the financial records, the photographs, the hard drives, the timeline, the name Gavin Sutherland. I told him what I'd been thinking late at night that I hadn't said to anyone yet. Clifford paused for a long time. Then he said, "Don't touch the hard drives except to give them to me. Don't contact her. Don't do anything that looks like you found anything." I dropped the hard drives off at his office the next morning. Over the following 6 weeks, Clifford worked with a forensic accountant named, and I will always appreciate this detail, a man named Douglas who wore reading glasses on a chain and printed everything in 12-point Times New Roman. Douglas went through the financial records the way Elliot had organized them and then went 3 layers deeper. What he found, explained to me in a conference room in Clifford's office over the course of 2 hours, was this. In the 14 months between when Elliot had apparently begun suspecting something and when he died, approximately $190,000 had moved out of accounts that were jointly held or accessible to both of them. Some of this had gone into the account linked to the apartment in Jersey City. Some of it had gone into a brokerage account opened in Renee's name alone, 9 months before Elliot died. Some of it, And this was the part that took me a moment to process, had gone into an account opened in the name of Elliot's estate 3 months after his death, using documentation that I had never signed as co-executor, an account that had subsequently made 2 large transfers before being closed. Renee had not been waiting for grief to pass. She had been moving money, quietly and methodically, while telling me every time I called that she was doing okay, just taking it one day at a time, still figuring out what came next. I sat in that conference room and I thought about every phone call, every time she said his name in a way that sounded like mourning, every holiday she had come to at my house in Montclair and sat at my kitchen table and eaten my food and asked how I was holding up. Clifford had also found something I had not asked him to look for. He had made some calls. He had found that Gavin Sutherland was currently living in the house in Parsippany. Not visiting. Living there. He had been photographed by a process server Clifford had hired, picking up mail from Elliot's mailbox, loading groceries into a cart at the Stop and Shop 2 miles from the house, parking in the driveway at 8 in the morning and not leaving until evening. He had not moved in after Elliot died. Based on what Clifford's investigator could establish, he had been there within 2 months of the funeral. Clifford said, "Are you ready to talk about next steps?" I said I was. The next steps took 4 months. I won't walk you through every filing and every response and every legal motion, partly because it's tedious and partly because some portions of it are still subject to ongoing proceedings, and Clifford has asked me to be careful about what I say publicly. What I can tell you is the shape of what happened. The estate had not been fully settled. There were assets still in probate, including Elliot's ownership stake in a piece of commercial real estate he held with a business partner in Morris County, and a retirement account whose beneficiary designation had been altered 3 months after his death in a way that required documentation I had never provided or approved. Clifford filed a petition in Surrogate's Court in Morris County requesting a full accounting of all estate assets and transactions since the date of Elliot's death, a freeze on any outstanding transfers pending review, and an audit of all changes made to account access or beneficiary designations in the 12 months following his death. He also sent a certified letter to Renee's attorney outlining every finding. I am told she received it on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, there had been 2 calls between attorneys. By Thursday, she called me. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message that evening sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when they are being recorded, when someone knows that what they say may be used later. She said she understood why I might be concerned. She said there were explanations for everything. She said she hoped we could talk like family. I listened to the whole message. It was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I did not call her back. The surrogate's court proceedings took 2 months. The judge was a precise, unhurried man who reviewed documents with the manner of someone who had seen a great deal of human nature in official form and had learned to let the documents speak for themselves. The forensic accountant testified. The records spoke for themselves. The findings were significant. The unauthorized beneficiary changes were voided. The estate account opened in Elliot's name was flagged for a full fraud investigation and referred to the Morris County Prosecutor's Office for review. Renee was ordered to provide a complete accounting of all transfers made from joint accounts in the 24 months before Elliot's death and the 12 months following it. The commercial real estate stake was preserved as part of the estate pending full resolution. She and Gavin were required to vacate the Parsippany house within 30 days while the estate was administered. I was in Clifford's office when he called me with the ruling. I sat there quietly for a moment, and then I asked him the same thing I had been carrying around since I first sat on the floor of that storage unit reading my son's files. Clifford knew what I was asking. I had told him in that same conference room months earlier about Elliot's timeline, about the last entry, about the accident on Interstate 78 on an icy February evening, about a man with a documented pattern of financial predation who had been in a relationship with Elliot's wife for over 2 years before he died, about a case that had been closed in 3 days. Clifford said. That is a different conversation, different jurisdiction, different kind of evidence, but I want you to know that I have already made some calls. He gave me the name of a retired state police investigator who now did private work and who had been briefed on the situation. I wrote down the name. I made the call that afternoon. I will not tell you what has come from that, not yet. The honest answer is that I don't fully know yet. What I know is that there are people looking at it now who weren't looking at it before, and that is different from where we were 8 months ago. And I have learned to take the difference seriously. What I can tell you about is the house. After the estate was properly administered and the legal proceedings ran their course, Elliot's ownership stake in the Parsippany property was liquidated as part of the settlement. The proceeds came to me as the beneficiary under his will. I did not keep them in an account somewhere and try not to think about it. I used part of them to do something that my son had talked about for years and never gotten around to. He had always wanted to buy a small boat. Nothing extravagant, he used to say. Something he could take out on the lake on a Saturday morning. He grew up fishing with me on Greenwood Lake up in Passaic County, and he always said that he was going to get back to that someday. He never did. Life kept being in the way it does, until it wasn't in the way anymore. I bought the boat. It is a 16-foot aluminum fishing boat with a small outboard motor. I keep it at a slip on Greenwood Lake, a few miles from where we used to fish when he was young. It is not named anything. I thought about naming it after him and decided that felt like putting a lid on something, and I wasn't ready for that. The first morning I took it out was in late May. I left the dock before 6. When the water was still and the light was just starting to come through the tree line on the eastern bank. I brought a thermos of coffee and a rod I had kept in my garage for 20 years, the same rod he had borrowed the last time we fished together, up here on this same water, when he was 32 and I was 57, and neither of us knew yet what the next 5 years would look like. I sat out there for a long time without fishing. Just sitting, and I found myself talking out loud the way you do when someone is gone and the quiet gets big enough that you have to fill it with something. I told him about the storage unit. I told him about Douglas, the forensic accountant, and his 12-point Times New Roman. I told him that I'd found what he built and that it hadn't been wasted. I told him I was still waiting on the thing that mattered most, the question I couldn't answer yet, and that I was trying to be patient about it. The sun came up over the tree line and the mist lifted off the water, and I sat there in a boat I bought with money that came from a fight my son had started but hadn't lived to finish. Here is what I keep coming back to. Elliot knew something was wrong. He had known it for at least 14 months before he died, maybe longer. He had been building a case the only way he knew how, the way an engineer does, methodically, piece by piece, with everything labeled and documented and stored somewhere safe. He had not told me. I think he did not want me to worry. I think he also may not have known yet what he was going to do with it, or who he was going to take it to. He had 4 words on his final note to himself. Need to talk to someone. He never got to make that call, but he left the room unlocked, in a manner of speaking. He paid the storage unit on time every month, right up until the point where the payments stopped, and when they stopped, the facility sent a letter to the secondary contact on the account. The secondary contact was me. He had listed me as the backup. He didn't tell me why. He may not have expected it to ever matter, but he put my name there, and when the letter came, I opened it. I tell people this sometimes, the people who ask how I found out, how I knew where to look. I tell them it was a certified letter about a storage unit I didn't know existed. They usually pause at that because it seems too small, too accidental, and I understand that. I had the same feeling sitting on that concrete floor the first afternoon, surrounded by my son's careful records, thinking about how close I'd come to throwing that envelope away. I almost had. It sat in a stack on my counter for 5 days because I assumed it was some kind of billing error or junk mail that had been misaddressed. Open the envelope. Go to the storage unit. Read the files he left. The truth is almost always somewhere. It doesn't evaporate. It sits in a climate-controlled room in labeled plastic bins, and it waits for someone to show up and go through it. I am 63 years old now. I have no illusions about what patience costs or what it yields. I have a boat on Greenwood Lake and a rod that still has his fingerprints on the grip somewhere, and a question I am still waiting on an answer to. I hold that question the way you hold a line in the water when you know something is there, not too tight, not loose enough to lose it. He built things carefully. He thought ahead in ways I didn't always understand at the time. I understand now. I will tell you more when there is more to tell. I have thought a lot about what kind of person builds a file like the one Elliot built. Most people, when they suspect something is wrong in their marriage, confront it directly or fall apart or look the other way. Elliot did none of those things. He went to a storage facility on Route 9 in Belleville, New Jersey, rented a 10 by 10 unit, and started documenting. Quietly, over 14 months, he labeled every box and paid the bill on time and listed my name as the backup contact, and he said nothing to me about any of it. I used to wonder why he didn't call me. I've stopped wondering. I think he knew what the information was pointing toward, and he wasn't ready to say it out loud to his father. Some things, when you name them, become real in a way that changes everything, and I think he was still deciding what to do with what he knew. He wasn't finished yet. He never got to finish. What I keep coming back to is this. The choices people make accumulate. They don't disappear. Renee made choices over 2 years, quietly, in small increments, and Elliot made choices in response, quietly, in small increments. And those two sets of choices eventually collided in a surrogate's court in Morris County, where a judge read through forensic financial records and voided the transfers and voided the estate account to the prosecutor's office. Nobody announces the moment when the weight of what they've done becomes too heavy to move. It just arrives. There is a version of this story where I throw away that certified letter because I assume it's junk mail. I almost did. It sat on my kitchen counter for 5 days. And I think about that sometimes, not with relief exactly, but with a kind of recognition of how much depends on small decisions. Elliot had the foresight to put my name on that account. I had just enough habit of eventually dealing with my mail. 2 small decisions separated by 16 months and a death, and they connected. What I've learned from all of this, if I had to put it plainly, is that integrity is not just a moral quality, it's a structural one. Elliot was an engineer. He understood that the integrity of a thing, a bridge, a building, a wife, is not about grand gestures. It's about whether each individual piece was put together honestly and with care. He lived that way. He documented that way. And when everything else collapsed around what he had built, the documentation held. The people who acted without integrity, who moved money and changed beneficiaries and walked into a dead man's house and started picking up his mail, they operated on the assumption that no one was watching and nothing would surface. That assumption was wrong. It is almost always wrong. And the reason it is wrong is not some abstract principle of justice. It is simply that careful people leave careful records, and careful records are patient in a way that dishonest people are not. I am 63 years old, sitting on a lake at 6 in the morning with a rod that still has my son's fingerprints somewhere on the grip. I still have a question I am waiting on the answer to. I hold it the way you hold a fishing line, present, attentive, not desperate. Elliot taught me that without meaning to. He built something solid in the dark, alone, without knowing if it would ever matter. It mattered.